So to begin, we'll have Christian Sandvig, who I think has my favorite paper title for the day, which is "You are a political junkie and a felon, and you love blenders." Please welcome that.
Thank you so much, Kate. I mean, actually, the paper has evolved slightly, so now your description is not perfect, but that is my fault. I just want to make that clear, and not Kate's fault.
I want a blender, Christian. There must
Well,
be blenders.
I love the title, too. What I'd like to present to you today for just the next few minutes is really a research agenda to get us moving towards some sort of resolution of finally solving this problem so we don't have to keep coming to NYU every 2 years. So my premise is that a precondition for accountability is really the awareness of some harm. And so I am going to focus my remarks on that situation. So I'd like to do this. I'd like to give you 4 recent examples of unwanted consequences of online algorithms, or algorithmic systems, I suppose we could say. These are things you're probably going to be familiar of. At least one of them has already been mentioned. So I'm going to go through these 4, and then I'm going to try and give us a way to thinking about how we detect the harms in those 4. So okay, here we go. Here are the 4. The first one was actually just brought up by David Robinson in the last session, and it's the Facebook real name policy, or ongoing fiasco, however you want to describe it. So the real name policy recently issued these messages with the really great title, which was "Please change your name," which is such a great user interface message in this context. And they issued these messages to people, particularly people of Native American ancestry, and so it makes Facebook harder to use if you don't have the right ancestors. So I haven't had this problem, but other people have. So this is case 1, is the Facebook real name. Case 2, there's a Google feature that many of you are familiar with, where Google tries to keep you inside Google by answering a question that it can deduce from your input. So if it looks like a question Google can answer, rather than directing you to an external web page, it will try to answer it for you. So in this case, I've typed in boiling point water, and it's just given me the answer that it thinks I want. So many of you are familiar with the Canadian children's television show Caillou. I don't know, Caillou fans, yeah. No? Well, anyway, so I have a daughter, so anyway, one of the things that many people, it's a very popular show, one of the things that many people wonder about it is sort of, why is he bald? So a really common question among parents, and a lot of people misinterpret that it's a show about cancer, and it really changes the meaning if you think that. And so it's a topic that many people are interested in, and they want to know about this question, and so they search for "Does Caillou have cancer?" and they get the answer that Caillou can't grow hair because he sucks. So this is case 2 of the algorithmic outcomes. I'm not sure this is an undesirable outcome, but it's certainly undesirable for the Caillou show promoters. So okay, case 3 is this fantastic study. Aniko Hanek and the group at Northeastern did this study just a few months ago. I'm sure you saw the amazing news coverage of it. It found all kinds of interesting things going on in the area of e-commerce. One that I'll highlight is it found that mobile phone users were offered search results that amounted to about 41 cents higher prices than people who weren't using mobile phones to search for things on the Home Depot website. So the mysterious 41 cents premium that mobile users pay at Home Depot. So keep that in your mind. And then finally, this is my own work along with my dear colleagues led by Mata Hari. So this work is forthcoming at CHI, and the title of the work really tells you the outcome. The title of the work is "I Always Assumed That I Really Wasn't That Close to Her." So this work found that when people think about the news feed on Facebook and they notice that some items are not appearing on the feed that they know are there, rather than attributing this to the algorithm, they attribute it to their social relationships, what we might, if a social psychologist might call an algorithm attribution error, if you like social psychology references. So they say, the reason I haven't seen anything from my aunt recently is that she doesn't love me anymore, or that she's changed the privacy setting so that I won't see it, even though in all likelihood that's not the reason. So you imagine someone in Menlo Park turning a dial and millions of people feeling unloved. So that's the fourth the fourth example. So if we take these four examples and compare them, my point here is to try and say that if we want to find out about the harms of these algorithmic systems, we have to differentiate these very different kinds of situations. And I'm going to give you a 4-cell table because I figured you'd like that, because this is the third one that you've seen in the last couple of hours. But this table is going to sing like Michael Jackson of Michael Jackson fame. So the first dimension I want to ask you to consider about this table is the question of whether the problem is discoverable by users. And by discoverable by users, I mean it's sort of relatively easily discoverable by users. The other dimension I'm interested in is the idea of whether the problem is predictable by designers. And I'm not necessarily thinking it's predictable in the sense that it was predicted, but rather it could reasonably have been predicted. If they had really thought this through, some of the things seem like kind of bonehead moves. So was this something that could be predicted? And so the reason this matrix is important to me is it is an agenda for future research in this area that I welcome your input on. Thank you. Let's see, start with the first cell here. So the first cell, this is where all the action is in this area. The first cell are things that are detectable by people and things that are probably should have been predicted by designers. A good example of this cell would be Facebook's "please change your name." If that happens to you, you're mad, and so it's very detectable by users, right? And I put media in that cell as the remedy, not because media aren't important in all cells, but because what we've gotten into is this interesting case. Hello, reporters in the room. You find something that the algorithm did, and it's like, wow, that's really crazy. I'm going to write a story about it, and then everyone's kind of like, oh, wow, this algorithm is really crazy. Facebook's so evil. So that's that cell, and that's where all our attention has been. So I'm really interested in moving our attention away to the other cells, particularly as a research problem. So if we go down, then we have things that are discoverable, and they may not be actually that predictable by designers. And that, I think, would be an example of Google's Caillou sucks. And I think that is important because I put it to you that Caillou does suck. And so in that case, what we're not talking about is an error by the algorithm or a badly designed algorithm, but the fact that Google is trying to summarize a lot of opinions on this, and a lot of people do think that Caillou sucks. And I'm not sure I would have, well, Caillou does suck. Let's just say it's objective and that Google has come to the right answer. However, that's an unwanted outcome for some parties. And it's also not a very foreseeable outcome. Like, I'm sure the people who came up with this feature at Google did know that there were going to be some weird stuff that came up, but they're not going to be able to foresee what stuff. And they know they're going to piss someone off. They're not going to be able to foresee who. So the interesting thing about this is we still have media as kind of the solution in this cell, but the media writes different stories. Instead, the story is like, funny old world. You know, rather than Facebook is evil, which is the upper left cell, you get this sort of like, oh, that's funny. Computers are so wacky because they connect these things that are disconnected, and this funny things happen, and like I get my story ideas from Reddit. So that's sort of that cell, right? So then the cell on the right at the top then is an example of this fantastic e-commerce price discrimination study. And there we have an evolving small group of people who are using what social scientists refer to as audit studies or correspondence studies. And these are studies where you inject false information into a system and then compare the results that you get from data that you have manipulated to try and infer cause. And so that's a really exciting area, but I'm dismayed that it's so small. It seems like it would be great if we could get more people doing this kind of auditing, and particularly thinking about removing some of the legal barriers to auditing. And I've presented about this last year, so I'd love to talk to you more about that. And then finally we have this, so an example of auditing is the Home Depot, I said that right. Finally we have this cell, and I'm not sure what the remedy is. This cell would be things that aren't predictable and aren't discoverable, or at least are very hard to discover. And I'm going to put our own finding in here about algorithm attribution error, because it wasn't what we were looking for, and we just found this weird reaction people had to algorithms, and it seems kind of bad. Like, I don't like the idea that people feel unloved when the curation algorithm operates, because they're not aware of the curation algorithm, or they're not aware of how it works, or they make the wrong inferences about it. But it's not really clear how anyone would have foreseen that exactly, and it's also not clear how to systematically do research that would find things like that. And so I'd really like to think about today, if you want to, what can we do in that cell? Because I think there's likely to be really significant consequences of algorithmic systems, and it's not clear as a researcher how I would go about finding necessarily some of the weirder ones. And you could imagine that because we're kind of doing this giant algorithmic experiment where all of our stuff is mediated by these systems, and it could be that we're drastically changing the relationships we have with our loved ones, or hugely disenfranchising some segments of the population. But because we don't really have a well-defined problem for that, it's not really an audit. It's like how do you end up discovering those things? Because my title actually comes from the fact that in any kind of data reduction statistics, you have this promiscuous association of things, and when you couple this to systems that have a lot of feedbacks, you're invariably going to get these really weird outcomes that are going to be hard to foresee and hard to study. So what to do? I'm wrapping up. What to do? Last part. We can address the things along the top row with ethics, and we see the machine learning community really some interesting stuff going on there where they say, let's acknowledge the limitations of some of these models, think about the consequences, and design systems differently. And that's great, so let's do it. But it doesn't help the other row, right? So it only is going to help that top row. Then what about this row? Well, here we've got some interesting stuff because we have this problem of the media, and maybe if you're, that's the thing I didn't point out earlier, if you're in a disenfranchised group that makes a good media story, you're much more likely to have a media story done about your algorithmic problem. So for example, it turns out, I found out by talking to people, that Facebook real names change your name prompt goes out to all kinds of ethnic communities. It's just that they're not colorful enough to get media coverage. So they only got media coverage when it's, for example, the Native Americans or the, the drag queen community that got coverage, right? So that's a problem. So maybe we can create user communities that do something with this information so that it can kind of route around these biases of the media. Judith Donath talks about data portraits. We could also have algorithm portraits that would show people the operation of their own systems so far as we are able. I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments.